So this is a little quick tip for Hammer hotkeys and workflow improvements and everything you can do, you know, because if you're faster at a mapping tool, then you can map faster. Makes sense. Yeah, if you can learn something, that is cool. If not, then if you already know everything, that's great. So basic hotkeys, you know, if you're in any of these modes, I'm just gonna start simple. If you're in any mode and you press escape or just press escape a few times, you're always gonna be in select mode, right? Like right now I have face edit sheet. Okay, I have to close it here, but if I have entity selected, if you're in any mode, you can always just hit escape a few times and you're back. If you're like stuck in some weird menu, Shift B to select the block tool, Shift E to select the entity tool. If you have a brush enabled, brush selected, Shift S will bring up the vertex edit. Shift X will bring up the clipping tool, and that was pretty much the basic hotkey. So now let's get into a bit more in depth. The most important thing, is so many people don't know about, is if you press X, now you're suddenly in 3D editing mode and you can move things in the 3D viewport. Look at that, and you can actually rescale this and yeah, do a lot of stuff in the 3D viewport, which is really cool. And so powerful, because now you can just like place a lamp and move it around and do all of this. Alright, if you're just stuck to the 2D viewports, this gets cut it so fast. The only thing we can't do in 3D mode is create brushes. I hope that Hammer++ will come out with a fix for that someday, but in normal Hammer, as it stands right now, this is not a thing. But you can create brushes this way and just move them around, or you know, copy existing brushes and then adjust them, which is actually how I map very often. I just like copy existing brushes and build my geometry that way. Something that's pretty important is selecting good settings here. In the 2D views, this is my preferred configuration. Enable default to 15-degree rotations. I will go into that in a minute, but this is what I want to go into now. Arrow keys, nudge selected vertex, nudge selected object or vertex. This is very important. With this, you can just press the arrow keys and move stuff around, and this is so powerful and important, because this when you have say you have some like structure, like for example a vac tube pipe that's like this big, right? Just change the size on the grid to be 128. I'll go into grid hotkeys in a minute too, and now you can just shift hold shift and use the arrow keys, and you can just like duplicate this pipe. And this is useful in so many cases when you have like some structure and you want to just copy it by an offset. You could use the Control M, the transformation tool, also called hotkey Control M, and it brings up the transformation tool. It's also available here, and you can move it that way. But this is just so much easier and faster just to be able to copy this. So I always recommend to have that use arrows to nudge enabled. It's pretty important, I think. Then you can just move stuff around. So let's get into the grid. On the bottom here, you can see snap on grid 128, or hopefully you can see. Maybe I'll actually zoom it in if I decide to do editing in this video. Now the hotkeys here depend on the engine. In Portal 2, Alt-A and Alt-S change the grid size. So if I press Alt-A, the grid gets smaller, and if I press Alt-S, the grid gets bigger. I find that this makes more sense than in CSGO, where I think it's like Alt, closed square brackets and open square brackets. Obviously this doesn't work here. Issue is that on my keyboard layout, those keys are not available without pressing other modifier keys as well, so this is what I have. If you're using something like Chaos Hammer, you will actually have a keybind editor here where you can change that. So that would be right here somewhere. Alt S and Alt D. There we go. There's, yeah. Oh, it's actually Alt A and Alt S, whatever. Yeah, there are those hotkeys. If you're using Hammer++, I think it also has something like this. Or if it's I don't know if it's finished. Normal Hammer doesn't have this. Yeah. That is a hotkey that I use really often. I usually just use the grid size of 8 because in Portal 2 this is a really convenient like size, because I can easily make brushes that are 16 units thick, and then I can apply this texture, for example, here really easily, and it fits perfectly. But I can also make smaller brushes like grid size 8 and also bigger brushes. I find that 8 is a good medium, but I find myself switching brush sizes much more often recently, just because I got used to the hotkeys. Now, one very important thing, you might find yourself go to like grid size of 1 to make like very fine adjustments, but there's a better way. I don't recommend this. Just press Shift W, and that will turn snap off. So now it's snap off, snap on, snap off with Shift W, and now my grid size is still 8. See, the grid is an 8, but my grid snap is on 1. So I still have my grid drawn on size 64 in this case, but my actual transforms are snapped to like units of 1. That is super good. Another thing you can do is, if you hold Alt, you get off grid you get completely off grid. I don't know how fine this is, but I'm imagining that this is like 0.00, like 0.001 snap or something. Yeah, just hold Alt and you can do this. I don't recommend doing this with brushes ever, but if you have like a chair, there, and you want to like adjust it and like move it properly into some specific position, and then this is perfect for that. Also, this is why I recommend turning on default to 15-degree rotations, because now if I rotate, it snaps to 15 degrees, which is useful for most rotations, but if I hold Alt, I still have fine rotation, right? Because if you disable this, now everything is a fine rotation. If I hold Alt, I'm just missing a feature basically. So yeah, just keep that enabled at all times, and then just hold Alt. Gives the best of both worlds. Texture lock is a feature that's often kind of misunderstood, underlooked, whatever. It's a very powerful feature. So look at the. I think it's on by default. It's the button here. The hotkey is Shift L, I think. I changed it to Alt 2 because I use it so much, and Alt 2 is easier on my keyboard to reach with the left hand. If I have it on, if I move the brush, look, the texture stays applied wherever it is. If I turn it off, the texture actually like stays in world space. See how when I move this, I'm kind of like changing the UVs on that. Yeah, this can be very confusing and very frustrating, especially if you're rotating something, because when you're rotating it, it sometimes messes up the transform. In this case, it seems to be fine. But yeah, I like to keep texture lock on most of the time. However, when you're dealing with decals, it can be very useful to turn it off, because look at this. This is the indicator overlay. I got a question about this, so this is why I'm showing it. And if I now stretch this with texture lock on, it gets stretched. But if I stretch it with texture lock off, now it's looping. It's repeating the same texture here. And this is exactly what you want when you're dealing with indicator lights, right? This just makes it super easy. The funny thing is when you move it, it still sticks, like the UVs still stay the same. I feel like it's actually a bug, because this should be textures a scaling lock and not texture lock. but whatever, that is just how overlays work. So yeah, good to keep that in mind. The Vertex tool also has some interesting hotkeys. Let me just scale this brush to be a bit more useful. So yeah, Shift V to go into Vertex edit, and now I can edit all of this. Sometimes you want to like create a new vertex here, and in this case you can just hit Control E. No, it's Shift E. What is it? Yeah, docs, come here. So yeah, the hotkey, I just found out, the hotkey is Control F. I keep forgetting this because I don't use it that often. But whenever I need it, I always forget it. Control F. So if you have a, like the middle of two vertices of a face here selected, you can hit Control F and create a new like subdivision basically. This is very useful. I keep forgetting this hotkey myself. Alright. And lastly, a very useful hotkey. You know how when you have an entity, you can double click it to bring up the object properties. Yeah, can be quite annoying when you like select multiple objects. So you can also just select however much you want, and then hit Alt Enter to bring up the object properties. I rebound this to Alt 1 because it's easy to hit on my keyboard with one hand. But yeah, very useful hotkey, Alt 1. So that's pretty much it for the hotkeys, I think. If I forgot one, then please tell me. But I think that should be pretty much everything. There's also stuff like if you're using a CSGO branched hammer editor, you can use Shift mouse wheel to rescale static props using the uniform scale override. So you can just do that, very useful. Just hold Shift and rotate the mouse wheel. This only works in CSGO or engines that branch off CSGO, like Portal Community Edition, Momentum Mod, and all of those chaos source stuff. Lastly, a feature that nobody seems to use, or at least know about, or I don't know, the cordons. So I think every like mapping tutorial has shown you that. Oh yeah, just create a big skybox around your map. Just make a brush and then go here, make hollow, or type in -16 or whatever, and now you can compile it to test it. You don't have to do that yourself. That's what cordons are for. Click the cordon button up here, drag a box, hit the cordon state button, unselect this, or just hit escape a few times, and that is your cordon. You can now rescale that. So what this does, this box here, is it just generates literally a skybox around you. That's a lie. It actually generates this texture here, the cordon texture, which is by default a tool skybox. So you can change it. But yeah, when you compile the map, it will just generate a box with that texture, skybox texture by default, around this map to run it all. And this is very useful for testing stuff, because you can just like go here and do this. You can also add multiple cordons, right? If you accidentally made additional cordons, you can go here into the cordon tab in the vis groups and delete them. You can also rename them and all of that, but I usually never do that. Yeah, it's super useful. It's also very useful because nothing outside of this box will render. So if you're dealing with a big scene and it's starting to lag, you can also like just make a box in the section that you're working on and ignore all of the rest, so that Hammer just runs faster in the 3D viewport. I mean, this map doesn't, this map is so small that it doesn't matter, but still a very useful feature that I don't see like beginners use or anybody use really, and it's a really good testing tool. So yeah, that's been it for hammer tips. I hope this helps someone. See ya.